When Clint Eastwood strolled down a quiet suburban street and stopped to watch a bald teenage girl struggling to push an old lawnmower through the scorching summer heat. Nobody paid much attention. She was just another kid trying to make a few bucks. But what they didn't know was that Emma Parker wasn't mowing lawns for extra pocket money. She was fighting to pay for her own chemotherapy. What happened next became a Hollywood legend because, in true Clint Eastwood style, he didn't just walk away. Instead, he turned this unexpected encounter into a life-changing lesson in resilience, kindness, and the power of never giving up. It was a summer morning when the sun streamed through the window of a small, cluttered bedroom where Emma Parker sat on the edge of her bed, tying the laces of her worn-out sneakers. She had never been the type to sit still. And she wasn't about to start now, not even after months of chemotherapy, exhaustion, and hospital visits. Her bald head, smooth and pale, was a reminder of the battle she was fighting. But Emma didn't dwell on it. She didn't want pity. She didn't want sad looks from strangers or whispered apologies from friends. She just wanted her life back. Downstairs, the quiet murmur of her parents' voices drifted through the thin walls. They thought she couldn't hear them. But she did. She heard every late-night conversation, every worried sigh, every desperate attempt to figure out how they were going to pay for the next round of treatment. The bills had stacked up higher than ever. Her dad had already picked up extra shifts at the auto shop. Her mom, once a full-time homemaker, now worked evenings at a local diner. They never complained, not in front of her, but Emma could see the weight pressing down on them. The exhaustion in their eyes. And she hated it. She refused to be a burden. She wasn't strong enough to get a normal job. Not with her body still weak from the treatments. But that didn't mean she was powerless. She just needed to figure out how to help. That's when she remembered something. Out in the garage, covered in dust and rust, sat an old lawnmower her dad hadn't used in years. It wasn't much, but maybe, just maybe, it was enough. With a determined breath, Emma stood up, her sneakers scuffing against the floor. She wasn't sure how yet. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to sit around waiting for a miracle. She was going to make one. The garage smelled like gasoline and old memories. Emma coughed as she pulled back a stack of boxes, revealing the ancient lawnmower hidden beneath them. The red paint was faded, and the wheels wobbled, but it still looked like it had a few good years left. Her fingers curled around the handle, her arms shaking slightly as she pushed it out into the sunlight. It was heavier than she expected. But she wasn't about to let that stop her. She wiped her brow, though there was no hair to push back anymore, and stared at it. This was it. This was her chance. It took 5 hard tugs on the starter cord before the engine sputtered to life. Coughing out a puff of white smoke, the loud rumble filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was in control of something. She grabbed a notebook from the kitchen table and scribbled out a plan. Lawn mowing service minus $10 per yard. She underlined it twice. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first few houses were the hardest. Some people barely looked at her when she knocked on their doors. Others hesitated, their eyes flicking to her bald head, clearly unsure if they should let her work. "You sure you can handle this, kid?" an older man asked. Scratching his chin, Emma lifted her chin, forcing a smile. "Yes, sir. I'm stronger than I look." It wasn't entirely true. Her body ached with exhaustion. But she wasn't going to let that show. After a long pause, the man finally nodded. "All right then. Front and back, $10. That first yard took everything she had. By the time she was done, her legs felt like jelly, and her hands throbbed from gripping the vibrating handle. But when the man pressed a crisp $10 bill into her palm, a new feeling rushed through her, pride. She could do this, one lawn at a time. She was going to fight for her own future. And she had no idea that fate was about to send her a customer who would change everything. The first few days were brutal. The summer heat bore down on Emma's bare scalp as she pushed the heavy lawnmower across yet another yard. Sweat dripped down her face, and her arms trembled from exhaustion. But she refused to stop. Every blade of grass she cut meant another step closer to helping her parents with the medical bills. Not everyone was as supportive as she had hoped. Some customers watched her with doubt. their gazes lingering on her fragile frame. "Are you sure you're up for this?" a middle-aged woman asked, eyeing Emma's thin arms. "I don't want you passing out in my yard." "I can handle it," Emma said, forcing a smile. Not everyone gave her the chance. Some people saw her bald head and turned her away, politely but firmly. Others offered her less than what she had asked for, as if her work was worth less because of her illness. "I'll give you 5 instead of 10, a man said after she spent an hour mowing his lawn. "You should be resting, not out here working." Emma clenched her fists but didn't argue. She took the $5 and moved on. She didn't need sympathy. She needed people to believe in her. The struggle was taking a toll on her. By the end of the week, her legs ached so much she could barely climb the stairs to her room. But she wasn't alone in this fight. Lucas, her best friend since childhood, had been watching her wear herself thin. One afternoon, he showed up at her house with a stack of flyers and a determined grin. "We're getting you more customers," he announced. "I'm not letting you do this alone." With Lucas knocking on doors and spreading the word, business picked up. More people started calling. Some even paid extra just to support her. And yet, Emma had no idea that her most unexpected customer was about to walk into her life. The lawn was a disaster. It belonged to an older man who hadn't tended to it in what seemed like years. Weeds curled around a rusted mailbox, and the grass was so high it nearly reached Emma's knees. The job was more than she should have taken on in her weakened state. But she wasn't about to back down now. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward, sweat dampening the back of her shirt as she maneuvered the heavy lawnmower through the overgrown jungle. She was so focused that she didn't notice the small crowd gathering at the nearby cafe. A group of older men sat at an outdoor table, their coffee cups steaming in the afternoon sun. Some shook their heads as they watched her struggle. "Poor kid," one of them muttered. "Shouldn't be out there working like that." One man, however, didn't say a word. Clint Eastwood. He sat back in his chair, his sharp eyes locked on Emma, watching every move she made. There was something different about her, something that reminded him of himself. She wasn't just working, she was fighting. For a long moment, he remained still, just observing, his fingers idly tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Then, as if making up his mind, he pushed back his chair and stood. The cafe grew quieter as he strode across the street, his boots clicking against the pavement. Emma, wiping sweat from her brow, didn't notice him approaching, not until she heard the deep, gravelly voice behind her. "That's a tough job for a girl like you." Emma turned, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know who he was, but something about him told her that this moment was about to change everything. Emma blinked up at the man standing in front of her, the sunlight catching the brim of his well-worn cowboy hat. His face was lined with age, but there was something about his eyes, sharp, calculating, yet strangely kind. She swiped at the sweat dripping down her face with the back of her hand, barely catching her breath. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing down her limbs. Clint Eastwood studied her for a moment, arms crossed over his chest. "I was about to ask you the same thing," he said, his voice low and even. "Why is a kid like you out here in the heat doing a job this tough?" Emma sighed and straightened, rolling her stiff shoulders. She didn't have time for questions. There were still patches of grass left to mow, and every minute counted. "I'm trying to pay for my chemo," she said simply. "My parents are already doing everything they can, and I'm not just going to sit around waiting for money to fall from the sky." She gave a half-hearted chuckle, though there was no humor in it. Clint's face remained unreadable, but he tilted his head slightly as if turning her words over in his mind. "You're sick, but you're working harder than most folks I know," he said finally. "That's rare." Emma shrugged. "It's just what has to be done." Clint watched her closely. She didn't flinch. She didn't ask for sympathy. She stood there, sweaty, exhausted, yet completely unshaken. Most kids her age would be crying, complaining, or giving up, but not Emma. For the first time in a long time, Clint felt something stir deep inside him. Something that reminded him of his own early struggles, the nights when he went to bed hungry. The days he worked his hands raw, determined to carve out a better life. This girl had the same fire in her. And he wasn't about to walk away without doing something about it. Emma thought the conversation was over. She wiped her hands on her jeans, ready to get back to work. But just as she reached for the lawnmower handle, Clint reached into his pocket. Emma braced herself. This was the part where people usually tried to hand her a few crumpled bills with that same pitying look. She hated it. She didn't want a handout, she wanted to earn it. But Clint didn't pull out cash. Instead, he held out a small, neatly folded piece of paper. "Call this number," he said, his voice steady. "Tell them Clint sent you." Emma hesitated. She looked at the paper, then back at Clint. "What is it?" she asked. Suspicious. Clint didn't answer right away. He slipped his hands back into his pockets, his gaze unreadable once again. "Something that might change things for you," he said, "but only if you're willing to take the first step." Emma frowned. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Clint gave a half smile, but there was something serious in his expression. "Because I know what it's like to feel like you have to fight the world alone," he said simply. For a moment, Emma just stared at him, her heart pounding. This didn't feel like charity. It felt like a test. She slowly reached out and took the note. The paper warmed from the heat of his palm. Clint gave her a small nod. "Up to you now, kid," he said. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing there with a piece of paper that might just change everything. Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at the slip of paper in her palm. The numbers, written in neat, blocky handwriting, felt heavier than they should have. Across from her, Lucas leaned in, his laptop glowing softly in the dim room. "Well?" he asked, clicking away. "Are you going to call it or just keep looking at it?" Emma bit her lip, torn between curiosity and doubt. "I don't know, Lucas. What if it's nothing? What if it's just, I don't know, a clinic or some donation thing?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "And isn't that the whole point? You need help. Clint freaking Eastwood just gave you a direct line to it." Her fingers tightened around the paper. It was still hard to believe. Clint Eastwood. She hadn't even realized who he was at the time. Just that there was something different about him. Something that made her feel seen in a way few people ever had. Lucas suddenly sat up straighter. "Okay, found something. The number is linked to a foundation. Looks like it provides financial aid for medical treatments." "Whoa, wait." His eyes widened as he scrolled. "Dude, this is part of the Clint Eastwood Foundation." Emma froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "No way. You mean Clint?" "Clint?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas smirked. "Yeah, the cowboy, the director, the legend, that Clint." Emma's hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed the number before she could second-guess herself. The line rang twice before a smooth voice answered. "Clint Eastwood Foundation. How can we help you?" Emma hesitated, her pulse pounding. Hi, my name is Emma Parker, and I was told to call this number." "Clint, Mr. Eastwood, gave it to me." A pause, then warmth entered the voice. "Yes, Emma, we've been expecting you." The next day, her world changed. A representative called her back, confirming what she could barely believe. The foundation was covering her next round of chemo in full. Emma sat in stunned silence as the words sank in. She wouldn't have to see her parents break down over another bill. She wouldn't have to keep mowing lawns until her body collapsed from exhaustion. And most of all, Clint Eastwood had been helping her all along. It started with a single Facebook post. Someone from the cafe that day had snapped a blurry photo of Clint talking to Emma. The caption read, "Clint Eastwood just changed a young girl's life. And she didn't even know it." Then came the local news station. A reporter tracked down Emma's story, interviewing her about her work, her battle with cancer, and how a simple lawn mowing business led to a life-changing encounter. Within days, the story went viral. Thousands of people were sharing the article, praising Emma's determination and Clint's quiet generosity. The headline alone was enough to grab attention. "Teen mows lawns to pay for chemo, until Clint Eastwood steps in." Strangers began reaching out. Some sent money. Others offered to cover extra medical expenses. A few even started a GoFundMe, which skyrocketed overnight. But it wasn't just about the money. It was the way her town changed. People who once ignored her when she knocked on doors were now offering her work. A local business owner gave her parents a discount on groceries. Neighbors who barely spoke to her before were now checking in, offering support, and asking how they could help. One day, while Emma was walking home, an elderly woman waved her down. "I saw your story, dear," she said, pressing a crisp $20 bill into Emma's palm. "My husband battled cancer. I know how hard it is. You're a fighter." Emma's throat tightened. She had spent so long feeling alone, like no one outside her family truly understood. But now, she wasn't just the sick girl anymore. She was Emma Parker, the girl who refused to give up. And for the first time in a long time she felt like she was winning. 3 days after the news went viral, a black SUV rolled up in front of Emma's house. She didn't think much of it at first. Reporters had been lurking around all week, hoping to snag another interview. But when the driver's door opened and Clint Eastwood himself stepped out, Emma's heart nearly stopped. From the porch, her mom gasped, nearly dropping the basket of laundry in her arms. Lucas, who had been sitting on the steps, practically choked on his soda. Emma just stared, frozen in place. Clint walked up the driveway, his hands casually tucked into his pockets, his movements calm and deliberate. Even now, there was something about him that made everything around him seem quieter, slower, more meaningful. "Mr. Eastwood," Emma finally managed, standing up from her chair. Clint gave her a small nod, his gaze flicking over her like he was sizing her up. Then, with a hint of a smile, he said, "Had to come see the toughest kid I've ever met." Emma felt her cheeks flush, unsure how to respond. This was Clint Eastwood, a legend, standing in her front yard like it was just another day. "Why?" she asked, genuinely confused. "You already did so much." Clint's expression softened. "I wanted to check in," he said simply. "See how you're holding up." Emma blinked away the emotion rising in her chest. "I'm okay," she said, then quickly corrected herself. "No, I'm more than okay, thanks to you." Clint shook his head. "Nah, kid, you did this. You kept fighting when you didn't have to. That's what makes you strong." He paused, studying her for a moment before adding, "You remind me of myself, someone who doesn't back down." Emma swallowed hard. She had spent so much time trying to be strong, pushing through pain and exhaustion, that she had almost forgotten why. But hearing those words from Clint, it meant something. It meant everything. She cleared her throat. "I don't know how to thank you." Clint chuckled. "You don't have to." He gestured toward her old, battered lawnmower. "Just keep doing what you do best." And with that, he tipped his hat, gave her a knowing nod, and walked back to his car. Emma stood there, watching as the SUV disappeared down the street, her heart pounding. She had always believed in hard work. She had always believed in herself. But now she knew that even the smallest actions, the ones that seemed insignificant, could change everything. The final round of chemo was the hardest. Her body was tired, her muscles weak, and the weight of it all threatened to pull her down. But she pushed through it. She fought like she always had. And this time, she won. The day her doctor officially declared her in remission, she didn't cry. She didn't break down. Instead, she walked straight to her garage, grabbed her lawnmower, and got to work. But this time, things were different. Now, she wasn't mowing for herself, she was mowing for others. She started offering free lawn services to elderly neighbors who couldn't do it themselves. She took jobs for single parents, families who were struggling just like hers had. She even donated a portion of what she earned to cancer charities, helping kids just like her. And people noticed. Her community, the same one that once doubted her, began rallying behind her mission. Donations came in, volunteers stepped up, and before she knew it, Emma had started something far bigger than herself. One afternoon, as she finished mowing a yard, she wiped her brow and looked across the street. A little girl stood there, bald-headed and small, watching her with wide eyes. Emma smiled and gave her a wave. The girl hesitated, then waved back, her tiny hand trembling. Emma's heart clenched. This was why she had fought so hard. Not just for herself, But for every kid who needed to see that survival was possible. Clint had once told her that life wasn't about how hard you fall, but how you get back up. And now, as she stood under the golden afternoon sun, stronger than ever, she knew she'd never forget it. Emma Parker wasn't just a survivor. She was a fighter. And she always would be. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even crazier.